Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/historyfangirl. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Kindle, Android, or MP3 player. Hi, I'm Stephanie Craig. Welcome to the History Fangirl podcast. This is episode 49, Philadelphia's Elfreth Alley. Philadelphia is one of my favorite cities in the world. I lived in Philadelphia from 2006 until 2016, and I spent a lot of this time exploring the city's amazing historic sites. But I did it a lot from the aspect of an amateur photographer, because at the time I ran, for part of this time, I ran a website called Philadelphia Daily Photo that no longer exists. But one of my favorite photos I ever took was Elfreth's Alley. Unfortunately, that photo I took was so long ago. I don't even have a copy of the photo anymore unless you go to Flickr. However, if you, like me, are a history nerd, history fan, there's really no better American city to visit or to live in than Philadelphia. I got to return to Philly over the past week to attend the national podcast convention called Podcast Movement. While there, I got to revisit some of my favorite sites in the city, dig deeper into some that I hadn't seen enough while I lived there, and one of those was Elfreth's Alley. So Elfreth's Alley it's such a cool place. It is the oldest continually inhabited residential street in America. And this alley was a great photo spot. And I knew a little bit of the history, but I hadn't ever spent time in the museum or really learned much about what life was like there. However, this weekend I got an invitation from Brittany Thomas, who is one of the board members for the Elfreth Alley Association, if I would want to come down and do a tour. And of course, I want to come down. I mean, if you say you are a board member at a really cool historic spot, do I want to come see it? I'm going to say yes. But the cool thing was I got to fill in a gap in some of my Philadelphia knowledge and then meet some of the volunteers and some of the street residents. So I got to kind of see a more 360-degree view of what life is like in the alley today and in the past. And then after Brittany gave me a tour, we sat down in the offices of one of the homes, and she graciously repeated all of the things she told to me on the tour in a podcast form so that I could share it all with you. And the one thing I want to say is that this interview was recorded live, so it may sound a little different than the ones I do over the phone, but that's just because we were literally in Elfreth's Alley while we recorded this episode, which was a pretty special, it was just a really special time. So I hope you enjoy the interview. My guest today is Brittany Thomas. She is a board member for the Elfreth Alley Association. Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
So Elfreth Alley I lived in Philadelphia for 10 years, and it's one of those places in Philly that are just very iconic to Philadelphia, but I don't know if a lot of people outside of Philadelphia are aware of what it is. Do you want to explain what Elfreth Alley is?
Yeah. So Elfreth Alley is technically the oldest continuously lived on residential street in America, which is quite the mouthful. But we have to make sure we say that because there's a place in Florida that actually holds the oldest street in America. But the homes here were built starting in 1702 all the way up through the 1800s. And it's an iconic piece of Philadelphia history.
So we just walked, and this is something that's really cool about having the show is you did a tour with me. So I got to see the alley. We're actually recording this episode from one of the second stories of one of the houses on the alley. So I feel like I'm completely surrounded by history, but why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about like what the alley looks like?
Yeah, so the alley today is it feels more affluent and a really nice place to live. Probably you feel as though the residents who live here today are a little bit more well-to-do. They probably are not quite like mansion status, millionaires or anything. It's still relatively affordable to live in Philadelphia. But of the time, these were working class people who lived here, making a living. They were working and living here on the alley because nobody could really afford to have a house and also a business down the street. So everything here was bustling. The Port of Philadelphia was actually at the end of the alley, which right now is a wall that houses I-95 that goes up and down the East Coast, which oddly enough was designed by Kevin Bacon's father. So thank you, Mr. Bacon, for that beautiful interstate. But overall, throughout history, it would have been a dirt path going down the middle, and the homes really started, going up one at a time. The Philadelphia row home, in other cities also called a brownstone, is not really a row home in the true definition of what a row home is. The true definition of a row home is where a developer comes in and lays down a foundation and then at the same time builds multiple homes. So it literally, in the sense, it is a row of homes built at the same time. These houses were pretty much all individually built. There's a few doubles, and I think there's 3 homes that were built together. But for the most part, each home is individually built, has its own style. You won't really walk into any of them and see the exact same layout or design. And then throughout history, there were people who were moving in here and building onto the homes to make them even larger. And I say larger very hesitantly because the homes themselves are really not that large.
So the house that we're sitting in right now, it's 2-story, and I'm not really good with dimensions, but how wide is this room? Do you know?
I don't know, maybe this room is probably 10 feet.
And that's the width of the house the entire way.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like a front room and a back room, essentially.
Yeah, I would say it's 10 feet by maybe 20 feet.
Yeah. So we're talking about houses that were for working class people that are very small and housed moderate sized families during the 18th century and have that kind of iconic red brick with blue and green or red shutters and pieces of ironwork on them. So it's kind of, if you think of a colonial city, this alley looks like it did as close as it can during colonial Philadelphia.
Yeah. And we're really lucky because the residents who live here, love the history of the street as well. So they've really bought into the whole, let's make it look like it could have looked back then. Maybe a little nicer.
So let's back up. And you're not originally from Philly, so I moved to Philadelphia from Kansas, having never been here before, but I loved the idea of Philadelphia. And then when I got here, it was that and so much more. But it's such an iconic American city if you're a history lover. How did you end up moving to Philadelphia, and how did you end up falling in love with the alley?
So my husband and I were living in New York, and I'm from New York. My husband's Australian, so he doesn't know anything about history beyond mid-1800s. But we were living in New York, and it was great, but it was time for something a little bit different. And we were trying to figure out which cities we would fit in and we could see ourselves living in for a decent amount of time. So with our dog in tow, we were just traveling a few cities on the East Coast that were easy for weekend visits. And we came to Philly, and we're history nerds through and through. So we're always looking for what hidden history alleyway can we walk down. And we found Elfreth's Alley. My husband was like, oh, this is right up your alley. You're going to love this. And we came down here after hours. So, we didn't have a tour or anything. We just kind of were Googling what was going on at the time. And there was a house for sale at the end. And we were really interested to know, oh my God, what would it be like to live on this piece of history? And we're climbing over walls, looking into the window and everything. And we just really fell in love with the city. In the end, we did not move to Philadelphia. We moved to LA. It was a short-lived stunt out in LA. And then we did come back to the East Coast and settled here in Philly. And, I just wanted to get more involved. So I, saw a posting for volunteers at Elfreth's Alley, and I was like, oh, I loved that. So I figured, why not? I work in corporate America, so I needed something to feel stimulated educationally with my mind. So I started volunteering.
So That is one of the coolest stories, and we're going to come back to that at the end, because I would be interested if, I'm sure a lot of our listeners would love tips for how to get involved in their own community's history. Let's talk a little bit about Philadelphia, and I think most Americans, at least, are familiar with William Penn and that he founded Pennsylvania and maybe Quakers, but it wasn't until I got to the city that I realized that William Penn, everything about Philadelphia right now goes back in some way to William Penn.
Yeah, I think William Penn's story, and living here in Philadelphia, I think I've been more interested in learning more about him and what he did for, what we see today in America. So William Penn, we've named the city after William Penn and the Penn family, but William Penn actually only lived in the colonies for 4 years in total.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was actually in 2-year increments. So he was here for 2 years, he went back, and then he was here again for 2 years, and then went back. And he died over in London. He actually died pretty penniless. So William Penn was a Quaker. His family was not Quaker. They weren't descendants of Quakerism or anything. They were actually quite a well-to-do family. His father's name was also William Penn. And little known fact, the city is actually not named for William Penn that we know. It's named for his father because his father was loyal to the king in England at the time. And the king, you name places after family, your fathers and heads of family, not after sons who are getting banished from the kingdom. So William Penn's father had died, but the king owed a lot of money to the Penn family. And so the king owed a lot of money to the Penn family. And he also had this horrible problem with Quakers, and the king hated Quakers because the whole thing was the king wanted this loyal following, and Quakers followed God. They did not follow kings. So the king was like, done, it's over, get out of my kingdom, it's finito. So the king is like, you know what, I think I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. I can pay off my debt by giving the Penn family a land grant over in the colonies, and I can also get rid of all the Quakers and send them over there. So William Penn doesn't come over initially. A large group of Quakers come over, and William Penn's fighting the good fight back in England for Quakerism, and he does eventually come over. It is his land, so he wants to check it out, see how far he can extend out, and he is probably, one of the more business savvy people who come over here. He sees the Native Americans who are here, and he's like, oh, I'm not going to mess with them. Let me negotiate with them, give them money, compensate them, as opposed to what's going on up in Massachusetts and New York with the Dutch and everything. So he was really good to the Native Americans who were living here at the time, and he was a really good businessman. So he was able to get Pennsylvania what it is today. It was a little different, of course, rightfully so. But he really was just like a genius in what he was doing. And Pennsylvania is mostly woods, and it's a large state. So the king actually wanted to name Pennsylvania just Penn, after his father. But William Penn was like, no, I don't want it named after my family name. I want to name it Sylvania, which means trees or something. And the king was like, yeah, no, that's not happening. So you have to tie something back to your family name. So they compromised naming it Pennsylvania, land of trees, tied back to his family and everything. So William Penn's here for 2 years, and he starts getting into a fight with the Baltimore family, Baltimore being another major city. And the Baltimore family felt that they actually owned the rights to Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was a really important part of Pennsylvania because it's the only access to water that Pennsylvania has. So Penn is like, if I don't have a port, then this area is going to fail miserably. So he starts fighting with the Baltimore family and ultimately has to go back to England to argue it out with the king. luckily, the king and Penn at the time are BFFs, and the king is like, yeah, there's some hidden, rule in this land grant saying if land was ever tried to be settled and failed, but if it's ever tried to be settled, then you don't have the rights to the land. And in the end, the Baltimore family loses out on that land, and it goes to William Penn. So
this could have been Maryland.
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely could have been Maryland, and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and probably what our country is today would have been absolutely different.
Very different.
So Penn's vision for the layout of the city was he lived through the London Fire of 1666, and he absolutely was terrified of disease and fires. So he had this really great layout saying, I want individual homes with land around it, so that way if a fire does happen, it won't spread like it did in London and did a few other times in London. Unfortunately, he was also a Quaker who didn't believe in religious taxes, so people were coming here, while he's not here anymore, and they were coming here in droves because it's so cheap to live, whereas if you go to Boston, you're having to pay a tithe, so a tax, to the church on every head in the household and some animals as well that you have. So like George Washington was paying a tax on him, all of his horses, all of his slaves, because yes, George Washington had slaves. And it was just not affordable to live.
So when we think of I think of Philadelphia as the most affordable East Coast city to live in. I think Baltimore is probably equally affordable, but I of the two, I feel like Philadelphia is the largest, and I don't want to offend anyone from Baltimore, but as a Philly stan, I'm just going to say more prestigious. I just like a better city to live in. And I think of a city like Boston or New York City and be like, I love those cities. I love visiting those cities, but I could never afford to live there.
Yep.
It's so interesting. Even when I had a very good corporate job before I just traveled around like a vagabond, I still didn't want to spend my money. I didn't want to spend half my income on rent in New York or, 40% of it on rent in Boston. It's interesting to think of Philadelphia as the most affordable of the East Coast big cities all the way back to its founding.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
And that's kind of why you see the homes start to be these iconic row homes, was because people were coming here in mass quantities and bopping up homes left and right. If William Penn saw what happened, he would have died, because it was absolutely everything he didn't want in a city.
So, and the city is still founded on his layout. He had a very strict grid system. He had a 5-park system. Which park are we near of the 5? Which one was the northeastern?
Well, we're actually probably, it's tough, we're in the middle of two. What's the one?
City Hall was built on one. You've got Logan Circle.
Franklin Square.
Square, okay.
We're between Franklin Square and Washington Square. So Franklin Square has the Chinese Lantern Festival thing that they do up there, and then Washington Square is Society Hill. So the homes there are also equally old, I guess.
Yeah, they're just so I was walking around last night and I love this city, and so I've come back twice since I left, and both times I remember different things that I love about the city, and this time it was just the architecture here is just different than anywhere else in the world, and I miss it. I don't know if I'll ever live here again, but I did not appreciate how special it was while I was here.
It's pretty fantastic, actually. This older part of the city, especially. I mean, on Elfreth Alley, we have Georgian-style homes and Federal-style homes. And you can kind of see that throughout the whole city. The homes in Society Hill are much larger. I mean, Society Hill sounds fancy. It was fancy. At the time, a little bit more well-to-do. And believe it or not, that was more the country of Philadelphia, where this is more the city of Philadelphia.
Which is funny because I literally walked from that part to here. It's in 8 minutes, but we're talking about at the time the city was much smaller and did not extend all the way out to Mount Airy, which is the last place that I lived. And, so let's talk a little bit about the people and what life was like here during colonial America. So up to the Revolutionary War, who were the types of people that lived on the alley, and what are some of their stories?
Yeah. So the people living here were working class people, as much of the city was. Again, you've got workers who are coming over here from Europe, and it's affordable to live. So the houses weren't really nice. It was just, simple homes. And on Elfreth Alley especially. So the house that we're in currently, actually the museum house next door, there was two seamstress women who were living there, running their business. There was a baker across the street, and you could kind of see that working class all the way past the revolution. I mean, just real, hardworking people. The seamstress women who were living here, they're in all of the homes on the alley. That first floor room was just one big room, and it's where they ran their business out of. The baker that had a big oven in his basement, a lot of people would make their dough and bring it over to him, and he would put it in their oven for a small fee, and depending on how much he liked you, or if you were going to give him some more, depending on where he put it in the oven. There was a chair maker in this house that we're currently sitting in. So, making the beautiful chairs that you think of Ben Franklin sitting in, which is a good point to bring up about Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was known to be really involved in the community, and he wasn't that hoity-toity, I'm better than you person. So though there's no written documentation, because nobody would really care to save that type of stuff, you can absolutely see Franklin's influence walking down the alley prior to the revolution.
Even just in the fire markers that you were showing
Exactly,
me.
Yeah. So there's fire marks. So fire insurance, firemen, it wasn't a public service like it is today. Fire insurance was needed because it was a private companies that would come to take out the fires, and they would look up at your home, and if there was a fire mark, they would know, okay, I'm going to get paid. So there's this misnomer that if you didn't have a fire mark, that you wouldn't have your house saved for a fire. And of course, there's lots of fires at the time because there's these large open ovens, essentially, that's very easy, or candles where the wick falls down and just lights up a whole wooden house. I mean, it's only brick on the outside, all wooden on the inside. So with that being said, though, firemen were human beings, and I know that these aren't iconic row homes, but they are all attached in some way. So if one house didn't have a fire marker on it, but the other house did, it's not like the fireman's going to let the whole row of homes, go down. So in some way, there was handshake agreements showing these guys are going to get paid. And in the end, everyone was like, this is stupid. Let's make this a public service because people's lives are at stake here. So now we have, the wonderful firemen that are out there today.
So, and there are different markers in different houses because there were different private fire companies, but Franklin created the first one?
Yep. So he created the first idea of fire insurance, and his are the markers that have, the hands kind of holding each other's arms. And that fire insurance, one of them I think still exists today, and their headquarters is in Philadelphia in this big, beautiful old house. I think it's actually on 3rd Street.
Oh, wow. I love Philadelphia.
Yeah. Hidden history.
So one of the things that we didn't talk about this specifically, but one of the themes that I kind of picked up when you were showing me around is how influential women were on this street, and how a place like Elfreth Alley preserves women's history in a way that I love Independence Hall. It's probably my favorite building in America, but I walk in and I don't see myself reflected at all in Independence Hall, but I see what my life might have been like if I had been alive at the time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the two women who lived in the building next door to us right now?
Yeah. So the two women who lived there, they were seamstresses, and they were hustlers. So in the common sense of the term. So mostly what they would do, they were mantua makers, and a mantua is that outer, more decorative piece that would be reflected on women's clothing.
So if you're thinking of like a Felicity doll or something, if you're a woman in your 30s and you're thinking of like Felicity or like from the American Girl dolls, that outer coat that she wore, like the blue one,
exactly.
that iconic. Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. That's called a mantua.
Okay.
So seamstresses were, really important. Now, most women of the time knew how to sew, but the problem is that fabric and cloth is so expensive. The cotton gin was not invented yet, so it's not like you got easy access to cotton. So a lot of the clothing was actually made out of linen. You needed some durable material. So what these women were mostly doing was actually pinning the patterns together, because a lot of the people who lived in Philadelphia couldn't afford for a seamstress to do a full-blown outfit, but they didn't want to risk taking cloth home and cutting it and making a mistake. It's not like we've got a Michael's right down the road that they can pop into real quick. But they would, the seamstresses would pin out the outline and design of whatever they're making. So in this case, mantuas. And the families could take it home and somebody in the family could sew it together to prevent that, waste of fabric.
It's so interesting, like with that or with like the baker, it's like things were so expensive, so you just get a little bit of help at the hardest part, or like you use the fancy oven, or you get the expert to put the clothing exactly right, but then you still have to do all the, like, so much of the labor. It's not a service economy the way that we have now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one cool thing about Philadelphia and this street is, so these people are living here and they're all workers. So having a lot of time to make these big elaborate dinners is not really a thing, and it's not like they have any servants who can make it for them. So what the kitchens, I mean, are almost non-existent, but there's Market Street right down the road, and there's tons of vendors there who would give you food. So a lot of the people who lived on the street, including the women, would just walk down with their little bowls and get some food right from the street. So takeout was kind of in existence even back in the 1700s.
So as colonial America is starting to change into what we would consider like the period of the American Revolution, and as Philadelphia is starting to become one of the centers of rebellion, how did life on the alley change?
Well, it's really interesting because a lot of people think back and they're like, yeah, America, we fought for our independence. And people think everybody was on board with that idea of let's become independent. But that's absolutely far from the truth. If you think about it logically, the safer bet is actually to side with England, because they're more established. They've got a much larger army, a much more organized army. So you have people who are like, I don't want to put all my backing into these crazy patriots when it's more likely that London or England is going to, come out on top, and I'm going to get killed because I didn't side with them. So it's not like we have our CNNs or BBCs of the world or Fox News or anything. There's not this mass media to tell you what's going on and to help you influence a decision that you're struggling with. There's just, pamphlets being handed out. You don't know what's real. So you just have to use common sense. And there was tons of conflict in most parts of Philadelphia, including the alley. And even though Independence Hall is right there, it's not like the common people are able to go sit in on those discussions and be a part of the debate that was going on for what we see today.
Well, and even the people, so I was at Monticello last year, and which is Thomas Jefferson's home, and the iconic picture of him, like, I think he's turning in a draft or something, but it's that iconic picture. Somebody asked him later, like, what he was thinking. Like, wasn't he so proud? He's like, I thought I had signed my death warrant. Like, it was, even for the people at the top, it was scary. So I can't imagine it wasn't scary for people
at the bottom.
And I mean, we're definitely not on a street that would have been the lowest level of society, but these were normal people that didn't get to make the decisions.
Exactly. And I mean, if these are business owners, they're in fear for their businesses. This is their livelihood here. So, and And I mean, the conflict can be seen on the alley. One of my favorite parts of the alley is actually Bladen's Court. It's this little side.
So I've been to Elfreth's Alley before, but I didn't even realize that was there. It's like, if Elfreth's Alley is off the beaten path, or like maybe the third place people think to visit in Philadelphia when they want to do colonial history, like, you have to actually walk in the middle and turn left to see like one of the coolest spots, and I missed it.
Yeah, it's this hidden gem of Philadelphia, in my opinion. It's beautiful. It's got beautiful trees, and there's history back there that people totally miss. But my favorite story is the two brothers. It was a brother and a brother-in-law who were living back there, and one of the brothers, he was a strong loyalist. He was actually working for the British, controlling something coming in and out of the port of Philadelphia. And the other brother was a patriot. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but Philadelphia was actually overrun with British. The patriots, the fighters at the time they actually lost the city of Philadelphia. They did get it back eventually, but the British were here for quite some time.
So if somebody like maybe doesn't know Philadelphia history, but is like familiar with Hamilton, the either you've seen Hamilton or you've listened to the soundtrack a million times, like the things that Hercules Mulligan is doing behind the scenes when New York is taken over by the British, that's kind of what life was like here.
Exactly. So these two brothers were at odds, and when things, flush out the way they did, aka not so good for the British, the Patriot brother actually got a gang of men together, like an angry mob is what I'm picturing in my head, with fire and everything, pitchforks or something, and they got the Loyalist brother and actually hung him.
That's so crazy.
And it's crazy because it's within the same family. And I mean, you can I always like to tie history, when I was younger, I hated history. I'm such an arguer. I'm such a classic New Yorker who would argue with everybody if I didn't see the full sense in learning something. But being able to tie history to current affairs is really important to understand why you need to continuously learn from the past. And the conflict that was going on during the Revolutionary War is very similar to what's going on with Brexit. I mean, you've got these people, people are at odds with each other. So this is a perfect example within someone's family that, one person believes one thing and another person believes another thing. Fortunately, we are more civilized, debatable, but more civilized today, and we're not going to hang our brothers for believing a certain way, hopefully.
Hopefully. So after American independence and through the 19th century, so let me back up. The way that the alley is set up and the way that most people think of the alley is colonial history and right after the Revolutionary War. So it's really 18th century America. And, that's what Philadelphia, when people come to Philadelphia to do history, that's usually what they're most interested in. They want to hear stories of George Washington and Ben Franklin. And, but the alley continued, like part of the thing about it is it's the longest continually inhabited street in America. So, what was like here in the 19th century, even though that's not a part of the alley that really maybe people come to like learn about?
Yeah. I mean, the alley really started to, go into disarray, essentially. I mean, more and more people, so in colonial history, families weren't huge. I mean, families were probably larger than what they are today, but affordability was still a thing. So you're not having 20 kids or whatever ungodly amount of family members that you have. And throughout time, you see families getting larger and larger. So actually, the museum house next door, the oldest part is the front room, and that goes up very Trinity-like with 3 large rooms. And you step up into the back kitchen, which is pretty large, and that is 1800s. You essentially are moving forward in time when you take that step up, because there was a baker who, I think he was a baker, a German family, who moved in, and he had a much larger family, so he needed more room. And all the way up until, tenement times, you see more and more people coming into these homes. There's a large Irish population who's from Philadelphia, and like that idea of 20 people in a room was very true even to the times of these homes. I always like to put it in New York, tenements went up. In Philadelphia, tenements went back. So all these homes started having additions thrown onto the back of them. There's actually a house, can't remember which number it is, but the gentleman in there, he is an architect. So he had this great idea. He blew out the back of his house and dug down to the original footprint, and he built this beautiful kitchen. But the reason he wanted to go out to the original footprint of the home was because he was fascinated with the fact that his now kitchen, which is really nice and large, but I wouldn't say it's huge or anything, was actually 2 additional homes that were being rented out behind.
Oh, wow.
And it's really hard to describe, so I encourage everybody to just go online and Google like Philadelphia row homes just to get an idea of what these houses look like, and then just picture 2 more homes that people were renting out. And there was a few homes on the alley that did that. I mean, you were really cramming people in here. And throughout history, throughout time, as we continue to move forward, the homes keep going into disarray and just getting worse and worse. And the one thing I love about this alley is why it was saved. Because to your point, we're very interested in what George Washington did and Benny Franklin over there. But I personally can't relate to those people because I'm not a wealthy landowner. I'm not in politics. I currently work in corporate America, so I'm really not anything that they were. But what the people were doing here, working class people, everyday people, this is what I would have been doing in history. So into the 1900s, it was a woman actually who saved the alley. She was fantastic. Her name was Dorothy Audie. The fact that she was able to look and have this opinion of this is something worth saving is really fantastic. And I'm so grateful for her fight, the big fight.
So let's talk a little bit about her and the preservation of the alley, because one of the things that we were talking about earlier with Dan, who's one of the volunteers, is how there are a few other places in the city and in the tri-state area that are almost like this, but have very specific imperfections that make it not the immersive experience that Elfreth's Alley is. And the city is so lucky that this woman decided that this was a fight to have in a time when people didn't really preserve things. And we're talking about had this happening in the middle of the Great Depression. So what was that? How did she end up becoming the savior of Elfreth's Alley?
Yeah. So she was a really cool woman. So she did not live on the alley. We thought she did, but she had a business on the alley. Again, always businesses here, whatever it might be.
And a lot of women's businesses,
yeah,
which I just think is really interesting.
It is really interesting, especially because the opinion of women was so low.
Yeah, and like you don't even think of women being business owners, and we're talking about one of the most interesting and significant streets in America is marked century after century with like the history of women entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing.
It is amazing. Another little tidbit, another woman who she didn't live on the alley, but she lived around the corner. She is like known for writing about Philadelphia and what it was like at the time, and just a very influential writer of the time. And I think just people forget how strong women were, but how much they had to fight. And also thank you to all those women, because a lot of the women today wouldn't be able to do what they're doing if it wasn't for these big-minded people. But specifically to Dorothy Audie, and she worked at 115 on Elfreth's Alley, which is just at the beginning of Bladen's Court. So she had this, it was kind of like a little kitchenette called the Hearthstone, and she was a place to be. I mean, we found a photo album of people lining up down the street to get her food. So another hustler, if you will, in the business world. She knew what she was doing to get people to come down here. And the alley in the 30s, I mean, we're talking about real like crumbling buildings. If you look at some of the photos that we've posted of Elfreth Alley, some of the older ones, when photography was a thing, you can really see like it looks nothing like what it does today. It looks like warehouses, factories. It doesn't look nice. And she's got this little business going on. So she's kind of a busybody person, and she sees some gentlemen who were from the city coming down the street, and she stepped out and was like, "Oh, hi, I don't know you. What are you doing here?" And they were here essentially to condemn some of the homes. And when they're condemned, it means they're getting knocked down. Bye-bye, see you later. But she was able to convince them to hold off. She got a group of, mostly women, but a group of people together to fight for the preservation of this alley and save it. And, you know, she was one of the founders of the Elfreth Alley Association. And it's fascinating because, again, we keep talking about it. We're in the 30s. She's a female and she's a business owner. And she had the wherewithal to know that this was worth saving. This is nothing like any of the other big history items that are in this city, but she knew that this was something special and there needed to be some attention here. And she was able to convince the city not to knock anything down.
Which is a big deal. And then over time, the city kind of takes the alley more seriously and starts to put up actual protections. When does it start becoming, when did it get entered on the National Registry of Historic Places?
In the 60s.
Okay.
And there's articles that you could go back to even before then where you start to see Old City becoming a tourist attraction. It gets some political movement. The mayor of Philadelphia sees the value in making Old City a little bit more desirable. To bring some money in, you start seeing actual tourism pop up in Old City. There's shops dedicated to tourism. So from the 30s on till today, Old City is now a tourist destination for people when they come to Philadelphia. It's not just the Rocky statue.
As cool as that is. So let's talk a little bit about your role here, because I think we're probably a lot alike in terms of like I had a very corporate sales job. We actually have similar backgrounds. I need to be doing something that stimulates me, that helps other people, that educates other people, that like protects, like, it's just like, I can't just crunch numbers or do sales for a corporation. And for me, it was like freaking out, quitting everything, starting to travel and just doing this. And for you, I think you found a more normal, probably like mom-approved way to have a balance where you can achieve both things at the same time, which I cannot do. I have to do like all or one. But how did you get involved with the board, and kind of what are some tips you would tell people if they are in a similar situation where they want to feel like they're doing more, but they don't want to give up the career?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I mentioned before, I was just looking for a volunteer opportunity. It wasn't necessarily tied into history. I've always been, I say I've always been, but I hated history. But then as I got older, I started loving history, and I've become this history nerd. I never thought about volunteering for history. I have my gripes about how history is taught and how these grand ideas about how it should be completely redone. But I was just looking for anything to volunteer, because as great as corporate America is financially,
and it provides a really great life, and it takes a certain amount of luck, skill, and privilege to get to do it in the first place.
As much as it's great, it's still making you feel a sense of you're making rich people richer if you're not that rich person.
Yeah, if you're just in the middle of the system.
The middle, yeah. So I've been one of those people. I feel morally obligated to add more to my community. So I was just looking for a volunteer event. So when Elfreth Alley popped up, I was like, oh, done. Love history, love the alley, and I get my volunteer fix. But as I started getting more and more involved, the history here has really sucked me in. And I saw areas to help this organization grow. Specifically, I was like, hey, you only have 9 photos on your Instagram. Do you guys even do anything with Instagram? And the director was like, no, but if you would like to volunteer your time for that. And I got involved, taking my background in corporate America and putting it into this nonprofit, and helping grow that, the best I can in my free time. And eventually I showed enough value that they asked me to be on the board. And it's pretty cool. I'm pretty young to say I'm on the board of directors at Elfreth Alley. I guess it's not the same as saying like I'm on the board of directors at Independence Hall, which you can't really be since it's government run.
Yeah.
But if you could, it's still pretty fantastic that I feel like I can make influential decisions in this little nugget of history.
So I think that, so I'm in my 30s. Are you late 20s, early 30s?
Late 20s.
Okay, that's what I feel like maybe our generation is at the point now where it's time for like us to step up and do things, and it's not just going to be people who can do it full time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just so interesting to me that like volunteering your skills and like throwing your passion in there got rewarded in such a cool way that you now it's like you're giving as much to the alley as it's giving back to you. And that's just, I think that I have a feeling that there's a lot of listeners who want something like that in their lives and maybe don't realize that they could get that in their community, preserving their own history. So I hope some people use you as an inspiration to go do more where they are. If someone comes to Philadelphia, so I have lots of ideas about what people should do in Philly, but as someone who is like intimately tied to the historical preservation of the city, what are like the top 3 places that someone should go after they go to Independence Hall? Let's assume they're going to go there. Mm-hmm. What should they do next?
So, they should obviously come.
And they're going to come to Elfreth Alley.
They should obviously come to Elfreth Alley without fail.
And they're going to do either a walkthrough or you guys do organized tours. Mm-hmm. What's kind of the schedule again?
So right now we are fully volunteer run. So we are open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 12 till 5, and we do walkthroughs, which are $3, and it's just like your quick fix of history. You don't want the full 45-minute tour, or if you are interested in the full 45-minute tour, we do it twice a day at 1 and 4, I believe, for $8.
On Friday, Saturdays, Sundays?
Yep.
Okay. And if somebody is in Philly and they're only here on a Wednesday, it's an alley. They can walk through here. Mm-hmm. They just can't go in any of the buildings. And don't go in any of the private homes. These are people's... Yeah. The appeal of the alley is that it's actually people live here and have lived here for 312 years or whatever. So 316 years?
Yeah, math is not my strong suit.
So don't go into people's houses. But the alley theoretically is actually always open. It's just... Okay. So so they go to Independence Hall. They come to Elfreth Alley. What are like 3 more places someone should see if they're a history lover?
So if you're in the area, you got to go to the Powell House.
Okay. I actually haven't been there.
It's fantastic. Lots of really cool history that it's lesser known, but it's more tied to founding of America. It's run by an organization called Philadelphia Landmarks, and they do a fantastic job over there. I think they own 4 properties. So the second property I'm going to tell you to go to is also owned by them. It's the Physic House. Okay. And both of them are essentially these big mansions.
I feel like both of them popped up when I was looking for places to get married as wedding venues, but I had never been to either of them as a tourist. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, I just did a tour of the Physic House, and I've done a tour of the Powell House. But the Physic House, it was just me, so it was like a one-on-one tour, which was fantastic. And because I work with the association, they took me down into the basement, which had this... So it was a doctor who lived in the Physic House, and he was working at Penn Hospital, and they were saying that they found this, what looks like could be not a morgue, but where there could be dead bodies where they would do surgery on it. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I was really lucky that a part of the community. So
but that's a reason that people who are history lovers should volunteer in their community, because you never know what other kinds of stuff you're going to get to see.
Exactly. And just in general, you have better conversations. When somebody else learns that you're helping out the community, I mean, it's all of a sudden like throw up information that's coming out your way. So you got to go to those two places. The Powell House was almost torn down and turned into like a gas station. So it was occupied by the British. It was, Martha Washington, George Washington. They would stay there and have balls there. I mean, it was a pretty influential place. And they've got a lot of the original items that were in the homes. Same thing with the Physic House. So thank God that those places were saved, because God forbid we need another gas station. And then the third place isn't it. It's a place that you're going to think of when you come to Philly. So South Street is a pretty iconic street in Philly. Very modern.
I love South Street.
Yeah. I mean, I live just off of South Street, so I'm always in that area. But Head House Square, there's a giant market that goes down.
I was there last night when I was walking around a little bit drunk.
Yep. It's a fantastic place, because especially if you're a history lover, you're walking around and you're like, I'm here at the same time George Washington was here. So it's a great little stumble through.
So I'm divorced, but I got married on South Street at Philadelphia Magic Gardens.
Oh, yeah. Another great place.
Which is, so I would say, like, maybe get off the subway on Broad and South, or I think it's technically not South. I think it's technically one street over, but it's been a while since I took that line. But then just walk all the way from 14th to 2nd, and the whole street is amazing.
Yeah, it's really lively. And the Philadelphia Magic Gardens, the fourth thing, it's not really a thing. It's more of, I advise you to do this. Philadelphia is really a walkable city, and I highly suggest you go to City Hall and then just walk east. And don't walk down Market Street. Go to like Spruce or Pine and walk, and you'll see randomly these little teeny alleyways that are cobblestone, and you can get lost in some of the little mazes. And people live there. A lot of the homes are just as old as the homes here in Elfreth Alley, but it is probably one of my favorite things to do in the city. And at my last company that I worked at, which is in Center City, I would walk every day to work to get over there. And I would be sure to walk through these little alleyways. And yeah, it probably took me an extra 10 minutes. But it was like 10 minutes of bliss for somebody who loves history.
So, Brittany, last question. If someone's interested in visiting the alley, where can they find information about you guys?
So you could go onto our website at elfrethalley.org, or you could come on Facebook, send us a message, Instagram, send us a message. It's mostly just me responding. So, it kind of goes to show you we really are a little community here at Elfreth Alley.
What's the Instagram handle for the alley?
Elfreth Alley.
Oh, it's just Elfreth Alley.
Yeah, ELFRETHSALLY. Or is it EY? So Elfreth Alley has been called like so many different things over time. If you were to Google on Google Maps, it's ALY.
Oh, weird.
So it's ALLEY.
Okay. So fine. And they should follow the Instagram account because that's you.
Yep. It's me just posting. So we're going to try and get our volunteers more involved with that, since I'm not here every day. Just to
with like the stories and stuff.
Yeah, just to help me out a little bit. I do have a full-time job, so.
Well, is there anything else that people should know about the alley before coming?
Just come. We are closed in the winter time, so you can't do tours, but we do. Last year we did a Christmas pop-up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it was kind of the making of Christmas, and it was tied back to German history. There's also a large German community here, and that came over back in colonial times. So it was like the making of Christmas, which was fantastic. And some of my favorite times in history are like Victorian era. So Queen Victoria was a huge influence in the modern day Christmas tree. So we're going to probably be doing that again. And it'll be just a walkthrough experience, and you can see the exhibit, you could actually go on our Instagram and look back at some of the stuff that we had there. So, and of course, we do twice a year. We have our Fete Day, which is in June, so it just happened not long ago. And in December, we have our Deck the Alley, which is my personal favorite one. All the residents of the alley agree twice a year. For the most part, almost all of them open up their homes, and we have a big event where people could come and you can walk through these people's houses, see how other people decorate, and just kind of be that nosy person that everybody really is.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me and showing me around, and then thank you so much for explaining everything you already explained to me again so that everyone else could hear it too.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you came.
I want to say thank you again to Brittany for inviting me to tour Elfreth's Alley and for coming on the show. If you're headed to Philadelphia or if you're looking for a cool reason to plan a trip there, make sure you put Elfreth's Alley on your itinerary. Housekeeping. I will be in Washington, D.C. when this episode comes out. It's my last day of my 3-week trip to visit friends and family in Canada and the United States. I'll be spending all of August in Sofia, Bulgaria, recording for you guys, writing new blog posts. I'll be taking a short vacation to Bulgaria's Black Sea coast and visiting a UNESCO site there, Nesebar, and seeing some of, nobody knows this, Bulgaria has incredibly beautiful beaches. So if you want to follow along with me on my journey, or see a lot of really cool dog Instagram stories, follow me on Instagram. I'm History Fangirl. I've been posting a lot of the articles that I write on Facebook. So if you're interested in that, check me out on Facebook, History Fangirl there too. And then also, if you have any questions or you need help with any trip planning or there's anything that you want to talk to me about, August is a great time to get in touch with me because I'm literally going to be working 24/7. So email me at stephanie@historyfangirl.com. I love hearing from you guys. It always brightens my day. If this is your first time listening to the show, head to historyfangirl.com. There you'll see links on how you can subscribe to the show, depending on what your device is. And you can also listen to the show right on the website if you don't want to listen on your phone. If you're already subscribed, if you would take a moment to rate and review the show in iTunes or the podcast app of your choice, that would be immensely helpful. And thank you so much for listening.